Hello to everyone joining us, both on-site and virtually, from all around the world. Welcome to this incredibly important panel titled Trials and Triumphs, Research, Collaboration, and the Patient Voice in WM. My name is Shelley Postek, IWMF Director of Community Engagement and Support. I am honored to be on stage today with some true clinical trial rock stars representing IWMF's pillars of research, patient education and support, and partnership. You may notice in the program that Dolores Seneff, IWMF President and CEO, was scheduled to co-moderate this session. She was unfortunately unable to join me as she still has no voice. But I want to extend a very special thank you to Lisa Wise, IWMF Vice Chair of Information and Support, for joining me to co-moderate today. Yesterday, you heard about the inspiring research and progress being made toward a cure for WM. Clinical trials are critically important to developing new treatments that will help us achieve our vision of a world without WM. At the beginning of 2026, the IWMF team launched a survey with the goal of improving our communications and ensuring that our content meets the needs of our community. After receiving over 600 responses from both digital and mailed participants, and a big thank you to all who took the time to share your feedback, we learned that your number one topic of interest was research and clinical trials updates. We have since been incorporating more research-focused content into our communications, and today is a wonderful avenue to deliver exactly what you want to hear most. It is now my privilege to introduce our esteemed panelists. Dr. Jorge Castillo, Associate Professor at Harvard Medical School, Institute Physician at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Clinical Director of the Bing Center for Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia. He is also the founding director of WMNet. Paul Kitchen, IWMF Board Chair. Meghan McGrath, Clinical Trial Nurse Navigator at Blood Cancer United's Clinical Trials Support Center. And Marcia Klepac, IWMF Support Group Leader and Lifeline Volunteer. Before we dive into our panel discussion, I am delighted to turn the microphone over to Lisa Wise to share her experience with clinical trials and debunk a few common myths for our audience.
Hello, friends here in Columbus and all of those participating virtually. Let's give a huge wave. Turn around to the camera, guy in the center back, and say, we love you across the world. We miss you. We feel you in the room with us. I'm Lisa Wise. I'm Vice Chair of Information and Support at the IWMF, and I'm also a third-generation B-cell lymphoma patient. My mother died at 59 from blood cancer. My grandfather died at 59 from blood cancer. But next week, I am turning 60 years old. Thank you. I am changing my family's story so that my two sons have a brighter legacy than blood cancer, and clinical trials are a part of that story. Diagnosed 15 years ago at age 45, I have had 3 treatments and the privilege of being on 1 clinical trial, and I hope to be on another clinical trial one day in the future because it was such a fulfilling experience. For my first treatment, though, I have to confess to you, I wanted tried and true. I said, give me FDA approved and the stuff that's guaranteed to work. But then, after volunteering with IWMF and seeing it commit over $33 million to WM research, I learned about the importance of clinical trials. And I also met my mentor, Marcia Klepac, who is the queen of clinical trials. She has undergone 8 trials in 25 years. and Marcia gifted me with two things: the knowledge that trials were an option and the courage to personally enroll in one. She is my hero, and I stood on her research shoulders. So today we're going to talk about why we all need to be a part of research to move toward a functional cure. And after hearing today's inspiring panel, I hope you will be moved to ask your own doctors, should I consider a clinical trial at some point during my cancer care? And can you please help me find one to consider? And we need to ask this question for one simple reason, y'all. Because we need and deserve more than 2 FDA-approved therapies, right? We need more silver bullets for WM, and we need more time. So my question to you is, why doesn't everyone sign up? Why do clinical trials lack participants? I blame one thing: fear. Fear of the unknown. And I get it. I really do get it. But in order to find more treatment options that offer fewer side effects and better quality of life, we need to spread the word so that all of us patients raise our hands and say, I am all in. So before we move on to the panel, we're going to do a quiz. We're going to do some myth busting. Here are my top 5 favorite myths about clinical trials. You yell out true or false when I give you a myth. It could be true, right? Number 1. Clinical trials are only for patients who have run out of other options. They're a Hail Mary move. True or false? Yes, I love you guys. Number 2, clinical trials are never offered as frontline treatment. You always have to try other treatments before you can do a clinical trial. True or false? Yes, new frontline treatment, you know. Number 3, clinical trials always have control groups, which means you don't know if you're really getting the drugs or getting a placebo. True or false? That's a loud false. Good. Number 4, there are no matchmakers to help make the connection between me, a patient who's confused, and all the clinical trials out there. There's nobody out there. True or false? Because they're right here on our podium. Number 5, you may not receive standard of care if you choose a clinical trial. That's a big fat false. So let's just say it's wrong, dead wrong, and immoral. So that one's not true. We've just you guys already busted all the myths. So the last word. On my mantle, I have a black and white photo of my mom dancing with her father at her wedding. 1 year later, he died from blood cancer, and he never got the chance to meet any grandkids. My mom never got the chance to meet any grandkids. But I'm going to turn 60, and I hope my kids aren't listening, but I'm planning to meet grandkids. No pressure, y'all, no pressure. And I'm planning to rewrite my family's story for me and future generations with the help of clinical trials. And I really hope you will all please join me. We cannot wait to learn more from our esteemed panel. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing your deeply heartfelt and powerful story with us. Hearing about your family's legacy and your monumental upcoming birthday milestone, your own journey over the last 16 years, and the courage it took to raise your hand and step into the clinical trials space is truly moving. Thank you also for doing such an incredible job of myth busting. By breaking down those misconceptions, you've given our community not just the knowledge, but the courage to ask the right questions of their physicians. And speaking of physicians, let's build on the foundation you've just laid and turn to our panel for their important perspectives. So Dr. Castillo, let's begin with you. Can you tell us about WMNet and what new trials are coming down the pipeline?
All right. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. It is truly an honor for me to be here. I still remember my first ED forum in Providence, Rhode Island. That was the first one I attended when I joined Dana-Farber. I'm the clinical director of the Waldenstrom's program at Dana-Farber. We do have a large clinic for Waldenstrom's there. We are 4 clinicians, and we are estimated to see about 4,000 visits of patients with Waldenstrom's per year, starting this year. So it's a large practice. And we provide all the different services, second opinions, clinical trials, clinical research, as well as laboratory research. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk about for the next 15, 20 minutes about what is WMNet and what trials we are running. And then we'll talk about the pros and cons of clinical trials a little bit. And at the end, some general considerations for patients to participate in clinical trials specific for the Waldenstrom group of patients here. So can we have my slides put up, please? There you go. Excellent. All right. So first of all, I can say almost without a doubt that in this room, we have the highest IgM concentration anywhere in the world right now. All right. Okay, so I've been at the Dana-Farber for about 13 years, and for the last 2.5 years, besides trying to escape the claws of ICE, I've been running some clinical trials through the WMNet. So the WMNet is an effort that is funded by the foundation. And the idea was to create a group, a consortium of academic centers interested on developing clinical research and clinical trials in patients with Waldenstrom's with the specific aim of improving the lives of patients with Waldenstrom's. And this is the map. As you can see, we have 27 different centers located in different parts of the country. And that number might actually grow over time. If you don't see your specialist or your center in here, please let them know about this. There is a website that you can see here, is wm-net.org, or contact me specifically directly, and I'll be happy to have these conversations. So the WMNet is a consortium of 27 centers as of right now. And we have a series of clinical trials I want to be talking to you about. And we're also creating a database that is going to be a national clinical database, something that does not yet exist in this country. So there are a number of different ways in which we are doing research that hopefully we can inform future efforts. So let me start with the first clinical trial. And you're going to see there's a pattern of thinking through this process. So the first agent I'm going to talk about is this agent called loncastuximab tesirine. This loncastuximab tesirine is an antibody drug conjugate that targets CD19. And you heard Dr. Kapoor talking about this, a few of these concepts yesterday. CD19 is a very interesting target, and you will see that many other agents are actually trying to target CD19 moving forward. But this is the first clinical trial in the world that actually is using an agent that targets CD19 in patients with Waldenstrom. So that's the innovation of the network. We're always trying to use the cutting edge to try to treat patients with Waldenstrom's. The second aspect is loncastuximab is already approved by the FDA to treat other conditions. But because based on our research and understanding of the biology of the disease, it makes sense to try that agent in patients with Waldenstrom's. And therefore, this initial clinical trial. So loncastuximab is given intravenously. It's usually an hour infusion. And we give 2 doses, as you can see the longer bars, 2 doses at a higher dose, 2 cycles. And then this is given every 4 weeks. And then 4 additional cycles at a lower dose, half the dose essentially. We do a bone marrow biopsy. That's the red triangle at the beginning, at the end of treatment. Some CAT scans, which is the square at the beginning, at the end of treatment, and then we follow patients up. It's a very short treatment, not chemotherapy including. We have so far not had any infusion reactions. We have not had any flares. So those are things that are always important. Not only we're trying to improve the responses, also are trying to decrease the toxicity and hopefully give patients a longer time of treatment. So this is a study that is being run at the Dana-Farber along with the Mayo Clinic and the Fred Hutch in Seattle. So this is truly a network study. And as of today, this study is fully enrolled. So this is the first study that we have completed, 21 patients. And we will be collecting the data as of June, which is the last patient completing the 6 cycles of treatment, and we'll present this data most likely at the national meeting at the end of the year, hopefully followed by a publication very soon next year. And hopefully, if the National Cancer Network feels that is of an importance for patients, it will become another treatment option for patients with Waldenstrom. So there will be a clear direct fruit of the research that have been done through the network. This is data that we presented with the first 14 patients. So this is just the first 2/3 of the patients. It was presented last year. Really good responses. These are people that in average had at least 4 lines of treatment. So this is a heavily pretreated population. And more than half of these patients had mutations in TP53. And you have heard what that story is all about in the last few days. So interestingly enough, when we looked at the patients with TP53 mutations, actually patients did better than the patients without these mutations. So I think if we get to a point in which we need to be treated, that is a consideration to be had. Obviously, it's not without potential side effects. And again, like every intervention in life, there are potential benefits and potential risks. The risks will need to be discussed with your doctors if and when this is a treatment option that will be considered. The second trial is a trial called ZEBRA, talking about rare diseases, the ZEBRA study. And interestingly enough, this study combines 3 different agents. So most of you familiar with treatments for patients with Waldenstrom's who have never been treated before. You can have either chemoimmunotherapy, which is bendamustine and rituximab, or you can have BTK inhibitors like zanubrutinib. So we said, what if we combine the 3 of them at the same time? Give patients shorter durations of chemotherapy, shorter durations of the pills. In that way, patients are not exposed to full dose chemo and don't have to be taking pills indefinitely. Can we induce similar deeper responses or even deeper responses and longer responses as well? So this was the idea of these treatments, and mainly because if at some point the patients were to progress after this treatment, chemotherapy is still an option. And because you didn't use the BTK inhibitor all the way to resistance, BTK inhibitors are also an option. So you're not burning much bridges with this. So that's the idea behind this. And this is the first triplet study of this nature that is run in the United States through the WM network as well. So this was 4 cycles of bendamustine instead of 6, and 15 months of zanubrutinib instead of indefinite duration treatments. And again, a bone marrow at the beginning, and the middle, and at the end. CAT scans at the beginning, and the middle, at the end. It's very important for us to make sure that we understand what's happening in the patient's bodies throughout the trial. Because these trials are new agents, they are new combinations. So we need to not only to know that it's working, but we need to know how it's working. And in that way, we need to learn and teach how this is working when we have to teach other people or the rest of the world when they start using medications of this nature. So these studies being run at MGH, Dana-Farber, Beth Israel Deaconess, located in Boston, the Colorado Blood Cancer Institute, and University of Texas Southwestern. So this is 5 centers running this study. And as of last week, we had completed accrual of 55 out of 55 patients already. We completed accrual in 15 months. This is probably the fastest study in enrollment for Waldenstrom so far. And we have asked the company to give us 10 more sites and 10 more patients. And it looks like they will actually provide additional 10 people. So hopefully they're going to be a small extension to be able to participate in a study of this nature. This is a study for patients who have never been treated, which is different than the prior one that I presented for patients who had already been treated. So every study has specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. The third study is using a medication called epcoritamab. Epcoritamab is a bispecific antibody. So these antibodies are a little bit different than the ones that pretty much are well known, like rituximab and ofatumumab and obinutuzumab. These are antibodies that are targeting specifically CD20. Epcoritamab targets CD20, but also targets CD3. CD3 is a marker of the anti-cancer cells, or called T cells. So these medications are injected under the skin. They go and find the cancer cell with the CD20 marker, and then brings the anti-cancer cell with the CD3 in close proximity. And by producing that close proximity, it makes it easier for the anti-cancer cell to see the cancer cell and then destroy it. So this is the first clinical trial in the world using a bispecific antibody in patients with Waldenstrom's through the WMNet. Now, another pattern is epcoritamab is already approved by the FDA. So we know these agents are safe. We are just reusing them, repurpose them for Waldenstrom's. So this is a little bit more time-consuming or time commitment for patients. And again, that's the idea, you to understand that every trial is just a little bit different. So in this study, we give weekly doses for about 3 months. So that's 12 weekly doses under the skin. And then every other week for 6 months. So that's 12 more. And then 3 monthly. So that's 27 shots. We start with a lower dose on the first day, and then the following week a little higher, the following week a little higher. And the first full dose is given at the end of cycle 1. And then we continue with the full dose throughout. And again, a bone marrow biopsy at the beginning, CAT scans at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end to understand what's going on there. So this study has enrolled 4 out of 20 patients so far. And I'm going to show you in a second one case that I think is very nice to see. This is run at the Israel Deaconess Medical Center, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and University of North Carolina. And we're trying to bring one of the West Coast centers into the mix as well. So this is the case that I wanted to present briefly, a 62-year-old woman who presented with anemia in late 2021. Bone marrow biopsy was done at the time, showed 90% involvement by the lymphoma, so a heavy burden of disease, and the IgM levels were well over 5,000. MYD88 mutations and CXR mutations were not detected. So this is a patient with what we call MYD88 wild-type disease. These patients are a little bit more difficult to treat because they typically don't respond very well to BTK inhibitors, although other treatment options might work. In this patient specifically, she got bendamustine and rituximab in 2022, only a partial response, which means just a 50% decrease on the IgM. That progressed relatively quickly, and within a year, the patient got into another clinical trial with pirtobrutinib and venetoclax, was into treatment for about 6 months, got only a minor response, which is a 25% on the IgM. We put her on bortezomib rituximab just because she had not been exposed to this type of agents before. Also 6 months of treatment, a minor response. Went into transplant because we said, 3 lines, not really responding very well. Went into autologous transplant. This is not allogeneic. This is autologous, your own stem cells. Got a partial response, and within a year, the patient was already needing therapy, and the patient ended up on epcoritamab. And this is her IgM. Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. Yeah. So within 1 cycle, we had a minor response, right? 25% decrease. Within 2 cycles, we were in a partial response. And within 3 cycles, we were already in a very good partial response. Patient started cycle 7 recently with a normal IgM. So this is not something that any of the treatment options before have done. Not chemotherapy, not rituximab, not proteasome inhibitors, not BTK inhibitors, not BCL2 inhibitors, right? So I think it's important to see this. And once we see something like this, there's nothing we can do besides getting very excited, right? And then trying to develop other treatment options of this nature, right? So this is just an example of what we will be seeing, hopefully with more patients as we get them enrolled in the study. So since we are almost done with the Zebra study, we started WMNet 4, which is the proven study. This is also for patients who have not been treated yet. And we lack the idea of giving patients these finite duration treatments. So we are bringing to the front line pirtobrutinib, which is a medication that is already used in Waldenstrom's, venetoclax as well, and rituximab. So none of these are new agents. We're just combining them in a different way. And the idea is, can we create some synergy by bringing BTK inhibitors, BCL2 inhibitors, and anti-CD20 non-chemo treatments for 2 years in these patients to induce, hopefully, deeper responses. So this will be the first triplet chemo-free intervention for Waldenstrom's in the world. And this is the design. We start with pirtobrutinib for a month, then we give venetoclax, which are increasing doses during the 2nd month. The 3rd month is a little bit of a break, so we continue the 2 pills alone, and then we start the rituximab on cycle 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so 6 monthly infusions. We continue with the pills until the 2-year mark, and at that time, treatment stops. And as you can see, bone marrow biopsy at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, CAT scans at the beginning, and the middle at the end. This study is open as Sloan Kettering currently, and we are about to open it at Dana-Farber and BIDMC in the near future. So we have so far 4 out of 40 patients enrolled in this study. And the last one is something that Dr. Kapoor mentioned yesterday, is with this agent called etentamig. It's an antibody against another type of marker called BCMA. So we have these targets, right? So CD20 is a target, CD19 is a target, BCMA is also a target, and we have all these treatment options that we're evaluating in this. Etentamig is not yet approved by the FDA, but it's about to be approved by the FDA because it's really doing wonders for myeloma. And that's the idea of using an agent of this nature. So as you can see, we have 2 types of trials for patients who have never been treated, and then trials for patients who have already been treated, right? And we kind of run these studies in parallel, in one after the other. So, in a way, we have always a trial being run. It's a bit more complicated in the terms that we start. I don't know if there's a pointer here. I don't think there is, but anyway. So we start with a cohort 1. You can see there cohort 1 in the middle. And then if the patients do well, we can go up to a cohort 2, which is a higher dose. And we do that very often in other studies. And then if that is not tolerated for some reason, we go down to a one level a bit lower. That just every 3 patients will decide if we need to go up or down. And once we are satisfied with how the treatment is going, we just choose that dose and we'll complete the enrollment of the patients at the end. So this is going to be about a 30-patient study. And this is planned to open at the Mayo, at MD Anderson, and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And this is going to be the first anti-BCMA agent in history for patients with Waldenstrom's. And for the future, we have a lot of other good treatment options. We're going to be focusing a lot on using these new bispecific antibodies. We're going to be combining these specific antibodies with targeted agents, which I think that's how we're going to get into deeper responses. And we're also start thinking about what we call CAR T cells, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So there's a T cell engager or a bispecific against CD19. It's called surovatamig, and we're planning a study with that. We have a lot of commitment already from the manufacturer. We'll proceed with it. And it's the same manufacturer as AZD0120, which is a CAR T cell. But this CAR T cell, instead of targeting just one target, which is CD19, it also targets BCMA at the same time, which I think is really cool for Waldenstrom's, because if you look at all the cancer cells in Waldenstrom's, there's a group of cancer cells with a lot of CD19, but very little BCMA, and another group of cells that have a lot of BCMA and very little CD19. So by doing both, I think we're actually going to be able to target the entire clone. So this is something that we are very excited about. Mosunetuzumab is very much like epcoritamab. It's an antibody against CD20, a bispecific antibody against CD20, and we are looking into combining it with either pirtobrutinib in the relapse setting or zanubrutinib in the frontline setting, and also consider epcoritamab and zanubrutinib in the frontline setting. The idea of all these trials is fixed duration treatments, chemo-free treatments, looking for synergy, trying to deepen the response that hopefully will be also a longer response. So very briefly about pros and cons. The pros of clinical trials, what some people tend to like, is that there's very close monitoring. We are on top of that. The clinical research team is on top of you. You are available 24/7 for whatever questions you may have. We monitor your disease very closely. There is always the possibility of higher efficacy, lower toxicity, or shorter treatment duration. That's typically the way that we think about these potential trials. There must be a potential benefit beyond of what we are offering patients at this time. We're always using novel mechanism of action that has biological importance. These are not just random stuff that we choose out of the air. We understand the biology of the disease, and that's why we're using this type of agents. And advances the field, right? So if this study becomes a standard, then that opens the floor for the rest of the world to use it. So that's the advancement of the field. The cons, because there's always cons, is more testing. So patients in trials tend to be poked and probed a bit more. As you can see there, more bone marrow biopsies, more CAT scans, because we need to understand how this works. There's more expense. Some of the aspects of the trial can be covered by the manufacturer of the drug, but most of these are FDA approved, right? So a lot of the visits, bone marrows, biopsies, CAT scans, and or infusion, nursing staff, and things like that are actually paid by the patient's insurance. And the patient needs to travel to the center where the research is being done. So there's definitely some expense associated with that. And as was mentioned earlier, the unknowns. right? So we'll do all this because we think things are going to work, but we do not know that things are going to work. I mean, we're pretty convinced that it's going to work, but I cannot guarantee that it's going to work, right? So we need to understand that there's a possibility that what we're doing, even though we have the best biological evidence and the best intentions and the best experience, might not work for your specific situation. And in the same way, patients can have adverse events that are unique to the disease and to that specific treatment that we just do not know yet, right? So pros and cons, which should be discussed with your team at any time. I think I want to finish by providing these general considerations when I talk to patients who are going to be on clinical trials. So most of these agents are not first in human. So most of these agents are agents that have already been tried, they're already FDA approved, we know they're safe, and then we're repurposing them to be used in Waldenstroms. And typically we use them at lower doses, shorter durations, more space between dosing. So we try to kind of modify the regimens to make it more palatable for patients with Waldenstroms. Now, an important aspect, and that was touched a little bit earlier too, the standard options should be discussed. It's very rare a situation in which really there's no other standard option left. If there's not, obviously that's fair to say. But if there is, that standard option should be discussed with the patient and talk about the pros and cons of being on that standard option, or maybe other trials that are not in my own center. There are other trials for Waldenstroms in other places, and if patients are interested in that and it's more convenient for them to be in that study, that should be discussed as well, right? And now, importantly, participation in clinical trials is totally voluntary. You can stop participation at any time. The fact that you sign the document doesn't mean that you have to participate, and doesn't mean that you have to stay on a study that is not benefiting you. If you are not liking the treatment, if you are not liking the frequency of dosing, if you are not liking the way the nurse looked at you one day, anything that you don't like about it, talk to your researcher or the clinical investigator, and a plan can be done for you to be removed from the study if you are not satisfied in any reasonable way. And that actually can come from the practitioner too. If I see that the patient is failing, that is not doing what is supposed to, that is not happening what is supposed to happen, even if some patients are like, no, I want to continue. I mean, it's not medically reasonable sometimes for patients to continue. So I can initiate that conversation too, right? So I think it's important to understand this. All this is reviewed through the consent process. So we have a document called the informed consent, in which we reviewed it with patients before they do trials, and we review each and all of these options, what we know, what we don't know, and potential issues that you might have. Who do you call with different issues? And understanding your rights. You are not giving up your patient's rights by being in a clinical trial. Your patient right is that your doctors will always look out for you. And you are not renouncing to that by being in a study. So with that, I really want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Castillo. We are so grateful to you for that very exciting and very inspiring update of what's to come. We're also super grateful to you and every single one of the IWMF rockstar physicians and experts and researchers who have taken time out of their personal weekend, time that would be spent with family, to be here with us at the Ed Forum. We are so grateful. Please tell your kids thank you, and all of their best friends say, hey, hi. Thank you, Dr. Castillo. Paul and Marcia, let's turn to you now for your critical patient perspectives. Paul, let's go first here. How did you decide it was time for a clinical trial, and what steps did you take to move forward? We can't wait to hear from you.
It was easy to decide to go on a clinical trial. I'd had basic chemo. I then had, when that relapsed, I had ibrutinib. When that brought my atrial fib back, I moved on to zanubrutinib. And then when zanubrutinib started to relapse, I then was looking for another treatment. I didn't want chemo again because I thought it perhaps might affect a future drug or a future treatment that would be available. And you want your B cells as healthy and as readily available as you can for those. So I was looking for a clinical trial, and I went to my friends at Dana-Farber. Because I'm Canadian, it was a little more complicated. When you live outside the United States, when you do a clinical trial in the US, you don't have US insurance, so you have to pay the incidentals. And that quickly, over the length of the trial, got over $100,000, which I didn't happen to have. And Jorge wouldn't lend it to me. We had to find we tried to find a clinical trial in Canada. And I wanted a clinical trial that had as much information. So with their help, I found one that had already had the toxicity taken care of. They had been doing it, and toxicity it was accepted by patients very, very well, with very low toxicity. They had very good responses. So it didn't feel like, to me, that I was going into a novel circumstance. I was going into a very knowledgeable set of circumstance. Didn't mean it was going to work for me. There's no guarantees ever. But all the information coming to me was this has worked for the vast majority, and there's no toxicities. So that seemed ideal. Dr. Castillo did point out that travel was an issue, and in Canada, without as many serious centers, I do have a long travel, but long and short, I got in difficulties in 24 because, or not difficult, but I got the sign in 24 that my IgM was going up and my hemoglobin was going down. And by the end of 24, I was not feeling nearly as well. So I made a mistake, and it was a huge mistake. I didn't tell my physicians how much trouble I thought I was in. I perceived I needed a next treatment, and I don't know, I just knew the gods would tell the docs that I needed a treatment, but somehow it didn't work. So I did explain at the very beginning at 25 that I thought it was really important, and they were very, very helpful, and I finally got in, and I had my first dose at the very end of March in 25. So just the one word of advice: you've got to be absolutely upfront with your clinician that your IgM's been going up a long time, my hemoglobin's going down, I'm running out of energy. We got to think about the next thing. And I could have done that 6 months ahead, and I didn't, and I waited, and that's on me. Anyway, I got on the clinical trial, and I don't think there's any secret. It's the BGB16673 that you've seen up on the screen, which is the B1 degrader trial. And it took, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. My IgM numbers went up really quickly, or down fairly quickly. So I got in a partial response. But again, from a patient's point of view, it's how you feel. It's how the symptoms are. And it took about 3 months for my symptoms to my fatigue to simmer down. And it's continued, and I'm just in far different health than I was this time last year when I was struggling pretty significantly. So I feel really lucky. I didn't think I was taking a gamble or rolling dice. It's just like WMNet3, where you saw that curve of IgM. That's knowledge you have before you go on that trial. And I think so often those things are there. And with the research, you can pick something that suits your idiosyncrasies. And so I'm so proud the IWMF has helped sponsor the WMNet and the cooperation we've had. Dr. Castillo and I happen to be on monthly meetings, and we see the progress that they're making and the difference it's making. The 5 unique clinical trials started because of your donations to the IWMF, and it's making a difference, and it's finding. So if you want something novel, they've got something novel. If you want something that is proven record, they've got something that's proven record. So, and I also just want to sing the praises of Blood Cancer United and their clinical nurses that are so wonderful and will help. We have a partnership with them. They know all the clinical trials that are involved in B1. They'll talk to you 33 times before you go on the clinical trial. They'll talk to you as often as you want. So we've got professional help and we've got those clinical trials. Anyway, that was my story.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And I'm glad that you're feeling well. We're all glad that you're feeling well. Marcia, let's go to you.
Yeah.
Lisa mentioned that you are the queen of clinical trials, having undergone 8 trials in 25 years. You are a pioneer of WM clinical trials. What tools did you use to seek out and join clinical trials?
Thanks, Shelley. I will have to go back to, 2002, when my disease was rapidly progressing. And this was the very, very early age of clinical trials with Waldenstrom's. The treatment options back then, for any of you in the room who had Waldenstrom's back that far, they were almost all chemo combinations. And you couldn't find a targeted therapy outside of a clinical trial. Dr. Treon had one trial of Rituxan at that time that was starting. But for me, my disease was way beyond Rituxan. So the only option I had, if I wanted to live, was really I had to do a chemo combination, and I did 2-CDA, excuse me, and Rituxan. 2-CDA is a nucleoside analog like fludarabine with potential DNA damage, and I was very reluctant to do it, but I had no choice. And so my local oncologist and I kept waiting and waiting for results, and almost nothing. I mean, I had almost no response to it. So his comment to me was that the only thing I know to do is aggressive chemo. And for me, that just didn't fit with what I wanted to do. And the reason is I'm nervous about anything that affects your DNA. And I also had issues with in situ melanomas they're okay, but if you get an invasive melanoma, it's another story. And I didn't want anything to mess with my DNA. So I said, well, I think I'll try to find a clinical trial. So good luck with that, right back then. So I knew that Dr. Treon was just beginning to offer clinical trials at Dana-Farber. And I went up to see him. And yes, he had a CAMPATH trial that was about to start. And so I was the first one that entered the CAMPATH trial. I felt like he had given me a get out of jail free card because it was such a relief not to have to do chemo. And CAMPATH is a monoclonal antibody, hits a different target than Rituxan, but it's very immunosuppressive. But I was optimistic about it, but early on, my platelets started to crash, and they kept crashing. And so within 6 weeks, we had to stop the trial. That was disappointing. But I was committed. I was definitely committed to finding a trial. So I heard about a trial through some research and just online, forums, and it was a trial of Genesense. That was the very first drug that targeted BCL2 in a different way. It knocks the the production of it down, but it was a really great target, I thought, and the researchers were very excited about it. Well, the drug was pretty mild, and so it didn't make it to FDA approval. But they were on the right track because they came along with venetoclax and sonrotoclax and these other drugs. So it was a good thing, and it kept me very stable at that point. But of course, then I needed more trials, and so I kept doing this repeatedly. And every trial I entered gave me a sense of hope. But realistically, I thought the trial is probably just a bridge to the next trial, to the next one, and the next one. And that's the way it ended up. That ended in 2013. And I thought eventually they're going to have, like we have now, they're going to have great, targeted therapies available outside of a trial. And that's exactly what happened with ibrutinib and then the drugs that are following. So I credit the trials with saving my life during those years, and I'm very grateful to the researchers and to the drug companies for making these treatments available. It just meant so much to me for my mental health, my physical health, and my local oncologist made a comment to me after I'd been in clinical trials for about 5 years, and he said, you're doing just as well as you would be if you'd had aggressive chemo. And I thought, oh, thank you. Yeah, so he was accepting of it, and they were always, the local doctors were always there for me when I was traveling around to all the trials. And I did 5 at Dana-Farber, 2 at the University of Maryland Medical Center, and 1 at the Cleveland Clinic. But I always, with the travel, I always plan to have some fun activities so that you have a balance. It's not just a medical trip, okay? You gotta work in the fun. And my biggest challenge during this whole process was just keeping ahead of my disease to make it to the next trial. Because there were very limited availability of trials. And now it's not a total different story. You can go and find trials all over the world, many different options. And so we're at a very good place. And it's been an interesting journey. And you don't have to go out and search for trials. They're right there in front of you. You can say, oh, I think I want that one or that one.
Thank you, Marcia. And speaking of searching for clinical trials, Paul was mentioning earlier about Blood Cancer United, who is such an incredible partner to us. I know that when WM community members contact the office and I talk to them on the phone or on email, I always refer them to our special partner. So Megan, I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thank you for having me, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah. We'd love to hear for those in the audience and virtually who don't know about your wonderful resource. Can you please explain Blood Cancer United's Clinical Trials Support Center and your patient navigation tools and resources?
Of course. For those of you who are not familiar, Blood Cancer United is a multi-pronged nonprofit. We have patient advocacy and education, but I think the Clinical Trial Support Center is a really unique thing that we offer. We're a team of 12 oncology-trained nurses and nurse practitioners like myself. coming from all different kinds of clinical practice across the country. And what we really offer to all of you for free is the opportunity to learn more about clinical trials by education, by empowering you. Going back to Dr. Ansell's talk about being the CEO of your healthcare, I'd like you to think of us as just another member of that team to bolster your ability as a CEO, because we want you to understand more about what trials are before you even need one so that you can educate yourself. And then next, we actually help you identify potential trials. So unlike what Marcia was going through in the early 2000s, we have a database that lives on top of clinicaltrials.gov. We can pull out these trials for you. We can write you a brief summary. We can make them more understandable. Dr. Castillo's slides were so helpful, right, to understand, well, what is this drug? What's it targeting? Is it FDA approved in other indications? And when you go on clinicaltrials.gov, that information's not clear at times. You don't understand that that drug actually has some safety data, has some positive outcomes in patients just like you. And we can help break that down for you. And we give you that list, again, not to recommend a particular trial, but to empower you to say, these trials could be right for me, and I want to bring them to my team. Or maybe I want to actually take the step and go to the center that has the trial if my center does not. How do I do that? And we offer support through that process of actually walking with you side by side to set up that initial screening visit. We even connect with doctors like Dr. Castillo in advance to say, could you take a look at this clinic note? Is this patient a good fit, even before you make those types of plans to travel? So we're a very comprehensive navigation service. If you wanted to get in contact with us, I've left a lot of my cards out on our Blood Cancer United desk out there in the hallway, but you can also email us directly at CTSC, the Clinical Trial Support Center, ctsc@bloodcancerunited.org. And for those of you who are not actually thinking, well, I don't think I'd want to participate in a trial, or Lisa talked about fear and uncertainty, just giving us a call to understand more about what trials involve, what's the difference between a phase 1 and a phase 2, so that if your doctor ever presented you with a trial opportunity, you already feel like you have that baseline knowledge to take that potential trial and understand it and really consider it as a treatment option.
Does anybody in the audience have a question for our panel?
Yes, we've got Carl Harrington right
Oh,
there.
we've got Carl. Can't see
Can
it,
you
but
screen without a microphone?
I think Katie's running over with the mic.
Right there, make a left. Sorry.
Thanks, Katie.
What? What? You-
Yeah,
That works. It's amazing. I'm really good with technology. I have people open the door for me because I don't know how to do that. But in the past at IWF Ed Forums, we've asked this question, and I want to know if it's any different. So I would love to see a show of hands of how many people in the audience have been on a clinical trial. Thank you. That's better than it used to be.
Oh, we got one up front.
should I go or?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I think this is, oh, I'll stand up. Hold on. This is for Dr. Castillo. I was so glad to see that there's a trial for wild type because there are people in that part of the journey. But I understand that usually for a clinical trial, an IgM level has to be a certain amount. And I find that a little fascinating since we talked about how much it doesn't matter, you know, just as long as you're in high. So could you speak to that in terms of trials?
That's a great question. So the main reason we choose minimum level, let me rephrase. The main reason we chose a minimum level of IgM is because we need to measure the response. And for that, we need to have an elevation of IgM to be able to measure the response. But we are trying, our understanding of selection of patients is evolving as well. So classically, for example, in the past, we were not including patients without IgM production. We were not including patients with amyloidosis. Patients with big Neal syndrome were typically, not included. So we are the new group of trials. We're trying to change that. So you will see, and again, obviously did not have too much time to go over all the little details of each trial, but some trials will allow amyloidosis patients to be enrolled. Some studies will allow MYD88 wild-type patients to be enrolled. Some studies will allow patients without IgM secretion to be involved. So we have these patients who have lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma without IgM secretion, right? IgG-LPLs, IgA-LPLs. We're actually developing specific criteria to be able to enroll those patients as well. So don't be surprised. The new generation of trials are going to be able to enroll patients in a much more inclusive manner.
Due to the smaller size of the trials on a WMNet, if the trial is a success, do you have to then do a larger trial, a follow-up trial to get the treatment approved?
Well, that's another great question too. So there are two ways in which we can get medications to be able to use those medications in patients with Waldenstrom's. So if we do, so one of them is the FDA approval. Yeah. So at this time, and that was mentioned earlier, the only FDA-approved agents for Waldenstrom's right now are ibrutinib rituximab, and zanubrutinib. Those are the only three. Ibrutinib was done without a randomized study, without a comparative study. Ibrutinib rituximab was a comparative study, was the Innovate study, in which it was ibrutinib rituximab versus rituximab placebo. And the other study, the zanubrutinib, got approved because of the Aspen study. That was a comparison between zanubrutinib and ibrutinib. So typically, large studies are the ones that get FDA approvals. The downside of those studies is is that there has to be very large. So typically, an institution cannot run a study of that nature. It has to be a pharmaceutical company that will give millions of dollars to be able to enroll 200 to 300 patients on a study, right? And that is a potential problem to be running, studies of that nature. But there is a second, at least in the United States, there's a second level of approval through the NCCN, which is the National Comprehensive Cancer Network. So if you have a trial, and again, I didn't get into much details into the trials that we're running, for example, for the epcoritamab study, right? For the epcoritamab study, we say the minimum benefit that we will allow is 40%, but we are really aiming for 70%. So that 30% difference, we will prove that with 20-some patients. So you go in with a hypothesis and you do the research to prove that hypothesis or disprove it, right? And that if the study reaches the benefit that is clinically and statistically significant, then the NCCN will introduce that treatment option into their treatment options too. And that will be, in most insurances in the United States, uses that compendia of treatments by the NCCN to be able to be used as well. So not only has to be FDA approved, and for that reason, we don't always have to do the large studies. Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult to add treatment options to patients with Waldenstrom's.
Thank you. Question from Pete.
Hi. As one of the patients who was treated with heavy duty stuff way back when, like Marcia, but I am really excited to see the fantastic option of treatments that are coming down the pipeline for us. So I really appreciate your efforts, all of you, and Dr. Castillo especially. My question is for Dr. Castillo with regards to loncastuximab. You mentioned that there's 20 patients in the trial, and you're going to wait until the last one in June finishes the follow-up. And then there'll be a presentation next year and then a publication after that. Is there any way to speed up that process so that the rest of us can get treated with that if it really is a great treatment?
Yeah, well, not really. because the patient needs to complete the 6 cycles of treatment, needs to have a bone marrow biopsy and a CAT scan at the end. We need to wait for those data. We need to collect the data, analyze the data, present it, and then write the paper, right? So my sense is the soonest we can have a publication is going to be in the first quarter of 2027. But the data will be presented very likely at the international workshop in Palm Springs this October, and followed by the American Society of Hematology meeting in December. So it sounds like a long time, but that's typically the process. It has to do with the quality of the data. So we generate the data, but there's a separate group of people that all they do is to ensure that what we are actually entering is good quality data, and that really induces a gap in between completing all the research activities and being able to collect the data and analyze it.
Thank you. I have a question from a caregiver.
Thank you. I wanted to be sure I understood how WMNet works. If you're a patient in care at one of the medical centers in the net, but it's not a study that is being conducted by your medical center, can you still be in the study without having to travel? So in other words, your local care provider could comply with treatment study protocols, but they're not the particular medical center that's conducting the study.
That is not possible. So the patients need to travel to the centers that are running the actual clinical trial. To collect data, to collect samples, that's different. That can be done in any center that is members, and we're now doing all the contracting to make sure that everybody can speak to each other in terms of data sharing. But for clinical trial participation, you need to go to the center where the trial is being run. As of right now, there's a mechanism called decentralized clinical trials that we're kind of looking into at this time, and maybe that will change things in the future. But as of right now, you will need to travel to the place where the trial is done.
I just want to quickly close us out and thank you all and our esteemed panelists for such an informative session spotlighting WM clinical trials and triumphs. IWMF is committed to continuing these critical conversations and bringing more of this focus to the forefront of everything we do, moving closer every day to our vision of a world without WM, because literally right now, there are researchers across the globe bringing this vision to life thanks to the generous funding from you, our WM community. And I do want to just very quickly spotlight IWMF's unique patient financial support opportunity, the IWMF Travel and Lodging Assistance Program, which can assist eligible patients with attending a clinical trial eligibility screening which is not paid for by the trial sponsor. This program is managed by the National Organization for Rare Disorders, or NORD, and can be available to those outside of the U.S. So for more information, reach out to me or contact office@iwmf.com. And this fund is also open to travel to second opinions with top WM specialists like Dr. Castillo. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time.